The aftermarket is awash with spring and shock options for conventional 2015 to 2023 Mustangs, but the unique configuration and damping range of the MagneRide equipped Mustangs limits spring options. Luckily, H&R Special Springs has a lowering spring solution for MagneRide equipped 2015 to 2023 Mustangs. We installed the company's Super Sport springs on a 2018 Mustang GT with the performance package and the MagneRide option. Compared to the factory front spring on the left and the H&R Super Sport spring on the right, the Super Sport spring is significantly shorter and features a progressive rate. The result is a smoother ride down the road with better reactions at the track. The rear factory spring on the left appears to be a single rate, while the H&R Super Sport spring on the right is progressive. For the first bit of travel, the spring compresses the top section, which is softer, but once those coils stack together, they activate the higher rate section at the bottom. Many of the S550 Mustang's suspension fasteners are mission critical and aren't supposed to be reused. Fortunately, Ford Performance Parts offers a handling pack fastener kit with everything needed to do the job. Let's get to work. To allow adequate clearance during future steps, we unmounted the rear brake hose from the chassis. Before disconnecting the shock, we supported the lower control arm with a jack. Next, we disconnected the MagneRide connector at the top of the shock and removed the shock mount bolts. There are a couple ways to remove the rear springs, and we chose to lower the rear subframe rather than disassemble the rear suspension. We worked one side at a time to not alter the rear subframe alignment. After supporting the right side of the rear subframe with the jack, we removed the subframe support bracket bolts. Then, we carefully lowered the right side of the subframe until we could fish out the factory rear spring. Note that we also changed the rear sway bar during this process, so it's already out of the way. If you're not changing the rear sway bar, you'll need to remove the end link for clearance. Sandwiched by the factory isolators, we slipped the H&R Sport springs into position. Next, we jacked the subframe and torqued the large subframe bolts to 129 pound-feet. Then, we raised the lower control arm and torqued the upper shock mount bolts to 66 pound-feet. Up front, we unbolted the brake caliper from the front spindle and set it aside. We disconnected the end link from the factory sway bar. Then, we separated the MagneRide harness from the strut. We unscrewed the nuts from the strut bolts, and then reinstalled them until they were flush with the ends of the bolts. The bolts are splined, so they take strong whacks with a heavy hammer to separate them from the spindle. These bolts and nuts cannot be reused. After removing the nuts securing the top from the strut tower, we removed the front strut assembly. We used a spring compressor to relieve the tension on the upper spring perch. Then we used the strut nut socket to remove the top strut nut. Note that we used two 10mm wrenches on the strut shaft to avoid rounding the hex off. With the top nut removed, we pulled the upper mount and spring from the strut. Note that the factory strut is a race-inspired inverted design. Interesting. The shorter free length of the H&R front spring allowed us to install the front spring on the strut without a spring compressor. Then we reinstalled the front strut assembly and torqued the strut top nuts to 46 pound-feet. Next, we installed new strut bolts and torqued them to 184 pound-feet. We finished by reinstalling the sway bar end link, brake calipers, and the wheels. The H&R Super Sport springs lowered this Mustang GT's ride height by 1 inch front and rear, perfect for this performance-minded road car. The ride is slightly firmer, but more controlled than stock. Now this car has the reflexes we'd expect of a performance package Mustang GT, and the stance is spot on. Lowering results will vary depending on the model and your factory ride height, but this car dropped 1 inch all around, which is perfect.